Well, that was a pretty great movie, Paul. What do you think?
Oh, it was awesome.
We can say that about our own film, right?
Yeah, in our own living room.
In our own living room.
Coming to you live from the Slow Uvalde studio complex.
On Music Row in Nashville, Tennessee, where you might hear some concrete being cut out on the street and some explosions for the buildings on Music Row, and who knows what you'll hear during this. But anyway, so I look at this picture of Guy and Susan and Susanna and Jerry Jeff, and to me, it's just such a classic Guy Clark picture. And when we were making the film, we used this as one of the images for the aesthetic of the film. Since you're the visual guy, can you talk a little bit about that aesthetic that we wanted?
Well, the aesthetic was, we were shooting for analog, I guess, is not really the right word, but Guy was a real hands-on, physical type of guy. He wasn't really into electronics, and so we didn't want the film to have a real modern, slick electronic feel. We wanted it to be rooted in the things that were part of Guy's life that you could touch and feel. And this photo was an actual picture that could be held. And
it's a Polaroid.
And so we have a lot of images in the film that we wanted to convey that they were actual objects that were held.
I wanted it to look like it was, coming out modern times, but really have that 70s feel to it, that, Guy, tangible images and everything.
And the feel of the film sort of progresses from the beginning, from the 70s through to the 2000s. Like we go from LPs to CDs.
Right.
And so the film does age, it does progress.
Right.
It's not stuck in the 70s, but...
Yeah, Susanna's TR goes from the old rectangle cassette player to the new little modern mini cassettes, and that's what her cassettes were as well.
Yeah. So we tried to show that progression of time.
Right.
Well, I noticed in the film that we don't see Guy on camera until the very end. Why did we make that decision?
Well, we made that decision. I remember very clearly us having a long talk about it, because it was, in my mind, it was really jarring to see Guy being frail and older, and he was so sick and toward the end of his life during the years that we were working on this film. And I didn't want to take people out of the moment in time that we were in the film, So when we were showing Guy in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, through his prime, I didn't want people to see old Guy and kind of be shocked by his look. I wanted, to keep them in that time. And I know you and I talked about that a lot, and you agreed. And I think it was the right decision.
In the early stages of us talking about what the film should be, we knew we wanted to have Susanna as a part of the film.
Townes and Guy were such big personalities, and I think Susanna's voice got lost in that. The people that were in the circle obviously all loved Susanna, and she was their muse, and she was revered within her circles. But the larger world didn't know her.
So the film took a major change in structure when we decided to make our narrator Susanna.
Yes. Bart, my co-writer, and I, when we started working on the script, and we were taking a screenwriting workshop in Austin that was like, 8 Monday nights in a row or something like that. And I think that's when we were trying to write the script and figure out the structure of the story, and we were working on our beat sheet. That's when it became very clear to us that, this needs to be from Susanna's perspective.
And when I heard that, it just made perfect sense. I was like, yes, of course.
And meanwhile, you and I knew that we had these audio tapes that we had not yet dug into. So when you and I started listening to those audio tapes, boy, it became very clear to have, TR as our I don't know if device is the right word, but to have Susanna's TR and audio diaries, it just to me made perfect sense, and I was happy to have that direction. I think a woman's perspective is often lost in telling these stories, and it was the right way to go in my mind. And between those diaries and the audio diaries and her written diaries, really, Susanna telling the story throughout, we were not putting words in her mouth. These are her own words. So it was all real. I'm really happy that it went that way. And Sissy Spacek as Susanna.
So where did that idea come from? Sissy is Susanna.
Sissy is Susanna. Yeah. You and I were having breakfast that morning at our little favorite pancake place, and all of a sudden, Sissy's face just popped in my head, and I knew she was Susanna. And I remember I yelled out, "Sissy Spacek is Susanna," and you were looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I just knew it in my gut. I knew that Sissy Spacek had to be our Susanna. And we had already decided that Sherry Talley, Susanna's niece, was going to be Susanna. So it's not like we didn't already have our idea. We did. But there was something so strong about that. And then I didn't know that much about Sissy. Of course, I loved her in Coal Miner's Daughter, and I love her as an actor, but I didn't know that much about her history. And so I went and bought her autobiography. And in that story is where I learned that after she won her Oscar for Coal Miner's Daughter, she came to Nashville and recorded an album. Rodney Crowell produced the album. So then I called Rodney and asked him about Sissy, and he said, not only did I produce that album, but Sissy recorded a Susanna Clark song on the record.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? One album she did, and she has a Susanna Clark song on it. And as Rodney says, Susanna and Sissy grew up, 100 miles apart in Texas, and they both have that East Texas piney woods timbre to their voice, is how I think Rodney described it. So yeah, Sissy came in the studio and just became Susanna before our very eyes, and it's exactly what I wanted.
When she came to the studio, we learned of another hard-to-imagine cosmic connection.
Yes, so weird. Sissy was telling us a story about when Sissy was 15 years old living in Quitman, Texas, and Sissy's best friend's cousin, who was a folk singer, came through town to sing folk songs with some church group. And that girl, she was probably about 18, 19 at the time, taught Sissy some guitar playing techniques. And we found out later that that girl that taught Sissy was Guy's first wife, Susan Spa. So yeah, Sissy didn't know that. We didn't know that until I had posted on Facebook about our day in the studio with Sissy, and Susan Spa commented in the thread, "Oh, I taught Sissy this guitar picking technique." And yeah, we verified that on both ends. And what a weird small world cosmic connection. I think Susanna was pulling the strings on that from the beginning. She sent me the lightning bolt of Sissy Spacek. So Marshall Falwell took this picture of Guy in the early 70s, and I had never seen it until we were looking for photos for the documentary, and Marshall's sister runs his estate and sent us a bunch of photos. And this one just immediately jumped out at me, because Guy is kind of looking directly at you. And even though I only knew Guy, when he was in his late 50s on or whatever, those eyes and that way that he looked at you just comes across in this picture. Because Guy, he looked directly at you when he was talking, and he would also use your name. When we would have conversations, he would always say, Tamara, whatever, and I noticed when he talked to you too, he always used your name. And I also thought it was funny that Guy always wanted to go eat meat with you.
Yeah, he wanted to have a steak dinner. He was an old school man of the world, and that's what old school men of the world do. They go out for steak dinners.
He would say to me, "Is Paul in town? I want to go out and eat a steak dinner with him." And we went out to that place that he loved on White Bridge Road. I can't think of the name of that restaurant. It was one of his favorite places. And
We both had the meat plate.
the big meat plate. Yeah, it was funny. And for some reason, man, he just really liked you so much. Like he asked about you all the time, and he was curious about you.
Who is this guy rummaging through my house?
Yeah, but he did. Every time I saw him, how's Paul? What's Paul doing? Is he on the road? And it was great that he liked you so much. That made me happy.
Well, I'm glad that he allowed me to rummage through his house, like I said, and
Yeah,
photo everything.
we did. We rummaged through his house a lot. Guy was so open about just letting us
He was.
dig
He was
through
very,
everything.
very at ease with us going through all of his private stuff.
Yeah, he was, and he encouraged it. He said to me numerous times, "You have full access to everything in the house. You can go through every drawer, look under the bed, do whatever you want to do." And you're right, he was just completely at ease with it.
It reminded me, or I thought about the song Step Inside This House or Step Inside My House, whatever it's called.
Right?
And I thought about that often because there we were in his house looking at all of his special little things. And he had a lot of
Treasures.
treasures. His house was like a museum to himself.
It was, and his books and things that were important to him. I remember going over there, and he would just be reading a thesaurus or the dictionary of slang, or words were important to him, of course, as a songwriter. But he was so into art, and at the end of his life, he was working on that painting of the guy eating watermelon that sat in his sunroom for so long, and his other paintings of Skinny Dennis that were on the wall, and of course Susanna's paintings, and just
Yeah, between takes, he and I had a conversation about Vermeer. I'm not sure how that came up, but we were talking about Vermeer, and he had a book on his shelf there that he referenced.
yeah, the girl in the pearl earring was something that he was attracted to, among many other things. And Guy was really into authors as well. He would always ask me, "Did you ever hear of this author? Here, check out this author." And of course, I'm a bookworm, so I loved that Guy was always turning me on to different books, and we would talk about books along with talking about music. So books, music, and art were Guy's things. Those are kind of my things too, and your things. So I think we're really lucky that we got to spend that time with him and got to know him. So yeah, this photo reminds me of the song Step Inside My House, which is the first song Guy ever wrote, and he wrote it as Step Inside My House, Step Inside My House, Babe. And he talks about all the treasures that are in his house and everything. But Guy never thought that song was finished, and so he never recorded it officially. And it was passed around Houston from songwriter to songwriter. Lyle Lovett heard it from Eric Taylor. And by the time Lyle heard it, the lyrics had been slightly changed to Step Inside This House, Step Inside This House, Girl. And that's how Lyle recorded it. Lyle told me that he couldn't pull off saying babe anyway. But when Guy wrote that song, he did record it at a radio show, a couple of different radio shows when he was on the road. And when we were going through the cassette tapes and digitizing those, we found Guy singing Step Inside My House. And it's such a great recording. It's just such a beautiful recording. So we have that. If you sign up for our website at withoutgettingkilledorcaught.com, you can get a copy of that recording. And Rodney's also putting it on a charity record that he's doing for Music Health Alliance. So I'm really happy that recording is now going to be out in the world. And yeah, this is kind of an example of Guy's little treasures. And also Guy was just so open with us about sharing his home and his history and who he was. We couldn't have made a film this intimate without Guy being willing to open himself up. And when I started working on the book and I was calling people to interview them for the book, every one of them called Guy to check to see if it was okay. And Guy said to all of them, give her anything she needs. So Guy was really generous and really gracious with me as an author, with us as filmmakers. And I believe that's why our film has such an intimate feel to it.
Having made the movie, it makes me wish I had known him back in the day when he was younger and wilder and crazy. He would have been a lot of fun to hang out with, I think.
Yes. Although I did do that once. I went out with Guy. I know exactly when it was. It was the Americana Festival in 2002. And we had dinner with the Sugar Hill people at Sunset Grill to celebrate the release of Guy's album, The Dark. And then I went out on the town with Guy after. And I drank everything he drank and smoked everything he smoked. And of course, it was just another night for Guy, and it took me 2 weeks to recover. And I never did that again. Because as you know, being married to me, I'm a pretty straight person.
Yeah.
So that was an very unusual night for me.
Well, he was always smoking, both cigarettes and
weed. Yep, he kind of...
When we were there at his house, he was always...
Yeah, he was a chain smoker, one after the other. And I don't think you really knew this part of Guy, because after he started chemo, he no longer drank. The chemo ruined his taste for drink, which really pissed him off. But I knew him when he was a big drinker too, and phew, he could put it away. Yeah, he was not a lightweight by any stretch.
Referencing weed, he would say, "Do you partake?"
Do you partake?
And I would have partook, but I was always focused on accomplishing what we were there to do.
Yeah,
that day. And if I would have loved to have just sat around and smoked weed with Guy, but we wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
Yeah.
Who knows where we would have gotten, but it probably wasn't where you had planned us to go.
We had a lot of work to do. So yeah, but it is too bad that you didn't get to just hang out with Guy and get high like most everybody else that went to his house.
We heard a lot of stories about people that got high at Guy's house and lived to tell about it.
I remember, I think one of the things Guy really liked about me is that I was not intimidated by him at all, ever. And when we started working on the book, he would ask me if I wanted to get high with him, and I was like, no, I don't do that. I'm not interested. No, thanks. And so I would always wear a scarf when I went there so I could have it over my face, because he'd be blowing this weed smoke at me, hoping I'd get a little buzz, which sometimes I did, but it wasn't on purpose.
You mentioned that Guy liked me, and I think that perhaps it was just the way that I came into his house I was on a mission, and I went about my business getting the shots that we needed to get and photographing the things, and I wasn't intimidated by the situation because I had a job to do.
Right.
I think that may have impressed him.
I think so too. And you weren't a fan. I mean, I think that's important to say, is that I remember when we started dating a very long time ago, and one of the first questions I asked you is, do you know who Guy Clark is? And you were like, what? Who? Buddy Guy? Roy Clark? And you had no idea who Guy Clark was.
No idea. Turns out I'm very familiar with some of his songs,
right,
but didn't know that they were his songs.
Yes, and you had no idea that you were going to end up in this Guy Clark rabbit hole with me.
Down in his workshop with Guy Clark.
Yeah.
I remember the one time we were down there in his workshop, and he was sitting at his table rolling and smoking and watching me. I was trying to get a high-res photograph of his self-portrait, and I had it up on an easel and the camera on a tripod, and I was trying to get it just right, trying to be very precise with the focus and the framing, and he was watching me through this whole endeavor. He didn't say anything, but I just felt him thinking, what is he trying to do? Why doesn't he just take the picture?
Well, I think he did. He was the type of guy that had an appreciation for other, artists and people that, were working in these mediums. And, Guy, anybody that's read my book knows this, but we don't mention it in the film, I don't think. Guy was the art director for a TV station, and he also had his own screening press in his garage and made his own silkscreen T-shirts and posters and everything in the 1960s when he was touring out of Houston. Guy loved graphics, and he loved good design, and he was involved in the design of all of his album covers.
He designed an album cover for Lightning Hopkins.
Yes, he did, and for the 13th Floor Elevators. And he took photographs that ended up on album covers. And he was an artist on different levels, although songwriting was the one that was the most important to him.
And he and Jim McGuire often worked very closely on the photos that were included in the artwork for
Absolutely.
the albums.
Yeah, McGuire started taking pictures of Guy in the 70s. They moved here close to the same time and got to be friends. And McGuire took all of the professional photos that you see of Guy throughout his recording career. Those are all McGuire photos. And in our film, so many photos are McGuire photos.
So we don't mention McGuire.
Yeah, McGuire's work is all over our film.
McGuire was there the whole time.
He was there for everything. He hosted those salons at his studio. And he and Guy, were the best of friends right up until the end. And as a matter of fact, when we took Guy's cremains from Nashville to Santa Fe, we had a memorial service at McGuire's studio. And then we got on a tour bus and drove for 18 hours to take Guy's cremains to Terry Allen in Santa Fe. And McGuire hates tour buses. So do I. And it was like, okay, McGuire, you have to come on the tour bus. You just have to. And I think that was showed how much he loved Guy by being willing to take that 18-hour trip on a tour bus. I'm sure that was his last time he'll go on one. But we couldn't have done this project without McGuire, just his moral support and his photos. And
he was a big help in getting us the images we needed.
Absolutely. And telling me background stories on Guy and just, part of the circle. I love these two paintings. They're Guy Clark paintings. He called them Hands and Knees, and they hung together in Guy's dining room. Of course, his self-portrait painting and one of Rodney Crowell. These paintings were really important to Guy. He liked this self-portrait painting of himself so much that he put it on his album cover of Old Friends, and he loved his painting of Rodney. They were very, very close to his heart, two of the favorite paintings that he did. But they hung in Guy's house, and anybody that came to visit could see them in person. And of course, this photograph is a great photograph, but it does not do the paintings justice.
The painting of Rodney's eyes, the detail in that is amazing.
Yeah, Guy, people knew that he was a painter, but maybe people didn't realize that he was a good painter, It's just, and he didn't think of himself as a painter first. Of course, he thought of himself as a songwriter first, but here he was painting these beautiful paintings and building guitars, and his silk screening and, his photography. And, Guy was an artist in many different levels.
From back in high school, the high school yearbook.
Yeah, his illustrations are in the high school yearbook. And then, of course, he learned woodworking, working at, in the shipyard. And Guy lived an artist's life from start to finish. Truly. He wanted his time and energy to go towards writing songs, and then his guitar building, painting, everything else was more of a hobby. But yeah, his job in his mind was to write songs, perform songs, record songs, period.
So what was the hardest part about making this film for you?
Well, there was lots of hard parts, but I think the hardest part was making sure all the admin was done correctly. We had to license a lot of music, which means the publishers and the record labels and the PROs, and licensing the photos and licensing the footage and just, all the paperwork that happened.
It was a lot of work. producer side of it.
A lot of work. It's really detailed. And, I already knew about music publishing from working in the music business, but boy, my knowledge base of music publishing has expanded so much from this process. I know more about music publishing than I ever wanted to know. And also, I love research, so digging for this stuff, I did enjoy that process and I enjoyed when we were out shooting. But then just the pulling together of the elements to try to figure out how to make this cohesive piece of work in like 90 minutes, it was nerve-wracking. And I know you and Sandra did the heavy lifting on the editing, but it just felt like, looking at every image to see if it was the right image to use at the right time, and the pacing and all of that was so new to me, because I had never made a film before. And it was hard. I don't know why, Paul. I thought the film was going to be easier than the book. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought, oh, well, certainly this film is not going to be as hard as the book. No. That book was hard and the film was 100 times harder.
Editing the film was definitely more than just slapping it together.
Oh,
Because we started off by just slapping everything together and throwing in everything that we wanted in the film, and it would have been 8 hours long
yes.
at that point. And then the real hard work began of deciding what to cut out, what was important, and just sculpting the film from beginning to end. Every little edge
Yeah. Every
was
piece
examined.
every piece of music and where it went, every transition. And I remember when Sandra came in, which was the summer of 2019, and having Sandra's fresh eyes, where you and I had been living in it for so long, and she's such an experienced, Academy Award nominated editor, that it was really great to have that fresh perspective.
Yes, she helped a lot to trim it down and focus it.
Yes, absolutely. What was the easiest part of making the film, Paul?
The easiest part was Sissy Spacek's narration. That was very easy, and it really brought the film to life when we put it into the picture and heard her as Susanna. It was amazing.
It was. It really was. It was just so seamless and so like, this is exactly what it should be. What was your favorite part of making the film?
My favorite part was working with Verlon on the music, all of the acoustic guitar that you hear throughout the film. Anytime you hear music that's not Guy's performance, it's Verlon. We had told him the songs that we wanted to do, but we didn't really discuss it that much, and we just went into the studio one afternoon, and he had some ideas of his own, and then we made some suggestions, and it was a lot of fun to just sit there with him, and he's such a good guitar player. We would say, can you play it more melancholy? And he would just play the saddest version of the song
Right.
you could imagine. So
Yeah. And of course, any time spent with Verlon is always my favorite time, because I love Verlon so much. I always say he's the kindest human on the planet, and I really believe that. And we couldn't have done this film without Verlon, We couldn't have done this film without all of Guy's friends, but, Verlon just, he and Guy were so close, and they spent all those years on the road, and he has been so generous with his time. One of the other things that was one of my favorite parts of making the film is our opening that we shot on the Natchez Trace, and finding the VW bus, trying to find a VW bus that was the same as the one that Guy and Susanna had. And I think this is where your filmmaking skills really shined, because you storyboarded it and you set it up, and we shot it over a weekend. And talk a little bit about that weekend and that shoot.
well, the opening is supposed to represent Guy and Susanna's arrival in Nashville, and Guy described it as a very cold, rainy November night, and it was in 1971. So we chose to shoot on the Natchez Trace Parkway here outside of Nashville, because there was no modern day signage or any type of buildings that would give away the time period. And although this actual bridge did not exist in 1971, it's such a cool shot that we couldn't resist
It's a great shot.
shooting the Volkswagen bus crossing it.
Yeah.
So it's inaccurate, but it's cool.
Well, and that weekend, the guys that own the VW bus live in Kentucky, Sean and Paul Daughtry, and it was their father's VW bus, and a really important part of their family. So it was really kind of them to trailer it down here and be part of our shoot and drive the bus and help us. It was just a really great weekend. And also, it rained at the exact moment that we needed it to rain.
Yes, it was supposed to be a cold, rainy night, and right on cue, it stormed. And so we got good rain on the VW bus.
Yeah, I think Guy was orchestrating that. We needed him to
And
make it rain.
we spent an afternoon, 2 afternoons riding up and down the Natchez Trace Parkway in this bus. I can't imagine driving it from Texas to California, back to Texas, back to Nashville, because it was not the most comfortable vehicle to ride around in.
No, it had a feel of being inside of a tin can to me.
was.
It was not,
It was loud and bumpy. And
yeah.
we've got enough footage to make the extended director's cut of real-time travel across the country.
We
in that
do,
van.
we do. That was fun.
So this bus is, we've seen those Polaroids of a bus, Guy and Susanna, in front of that
Yes.
dual cab.
Yes.
That particular VW he purchased here in Nashville. So that was not the vehicle they
Not the
drove
same bus.
across. He owned several buses over his lifetime, and the one that's pictured, the dual cab, was purchased here in Nashville. And
I thought it was funny that when we were interviewing Guy toward the end of his life and his memory, you know, he was struggling to remember certain things. But boy, when you asked him about the VW buses, he knew every detail.
yes, he knew everything. He knew when he first saw it, the whole lineage of that dual cab, who had it before him, where he first saw it, who he sold it to. It's probably still here in Nashville somewhere.
It probably is. So another thing that was fun is when we took our film crew and we went to Guy's hometown of Rockport, Texas.
Yeah.
There's Main Street.
We got to hang out with his sisters.
Jan and Cairo were so kind to us during the making of the film, and also when I was writing my book, I spent so much time in their home in Rockport going through all of the family archives, and they allowed us to do that again with the film. So I feel like Rockport is now part of my identity, and I love that town so much. And really, you know, Guy talked about Rockport. He called it idyllic growing up there because the family had left West Texas and moved to Rockport when Guy's dad opened up his law practice there. And, you know, Guy living on the beach, it's where he got to know about building the carpenters, building the shrimp boats, which was really, you know, fascinating to him. And he really came of age in this little town, had his first girlfriend there, you know, was so active in high school, which was so surprising, right? Captain of the football team, ran track, you know, student council. He was just this, his friends in Rockport called him a goody two-shoes. So it was really nice to kind of get to know that side of Guy.
Well, the song "The South Coast of Texas" really captures the feel of Rockport.
It does so perfectly, so perfectly. I wish we were there right now, looking out at the ocean.
Well, when we were in Rockport, we interviewed Guy's sisters, Jan and Cairo, on camera, along with
Carl Snyder, Guy's
Carl
best friend,
Snyder.
and Juliet Brown, who was one of Guy's first girlfriends.
Yeah, unfortunately, they did not make the final cut.
No, there's so many people we interviewed that did not make the final cut. But that's because, you know, when we first started working on the film, when Guy was alive, we just weren't sure what it was going to be.
Yeah, we didn't know the structure. It evolved.
It did evolve, and it was important for us to get Guy on film because we knew that he was not going to live very long. And it was important to me to go to his hometown and some of these places to shoot, but we still did not know the structure. We did not have a script yet. The script wasn't written until early 2017, and we went to Rockport in 2015. So quite a bit evolved. But boy, that Rockport footage is really cool. I like it.
It was fun.
It was
to
a fun
be there
trip.
shooting it.
It really was. Except that our crew kind of treated us like we were the parents and they were always off doing fun stuff without us.
Yeah, we were too serious for them.
Even my dad. My dad was part of the crew and he was like, I'm going to go hang out with these guys.
We were too serious. The party poopers. The adults.
We have each other. Another place that was really fun to go was Luckenbach. That was the first shoot we did.
I'd never been to Luckenbach. That was my first trip.
Well, the guy that wrote Luckenbach, Texas, Chip's Moment, has never been to Luckenbach either. So
I could have written the song.
You could have written the song. Guy truly never got over that, because he was with Chips. Guy and Susanna were with Chips telling him about Luckenbach, Texas, because Guy was in love with Luckenbach and it was such a magical place for him. And he kept saying to Chips, let's go, let's go, come on, let's go to Luckenbach, Texas. And then for Chips to write that song, Guy, after that happened, he stopped recording at Chip's studio. He became, kind of distanced himself from Chip. I think he was really hurt that Chips wrote that song and Guy didn't get to write it. And then the fact that it was a big hit. But the good thing is it brought the magic of Luckenbach to the greater world. And now people can go to Luckenbach and check it out on their own.
I knew the song.
You knew the song and you don't even like country music. And this picture, it's Jerry, Jeff, and Susan, and Guy and Susanna, and a guy in Guy's band whose name just went right out of my head. But this is when Jerry Jeff recorded Viva Terlingua in Luckenbach. So it's a great historical photo.
And everything is pretty much exactly the same.
Exactly. Nothing's changed.
You can go to that very spot, and I think all those photos and everything on the wall, it's all exactly the same. There's probably more of it there now.
Yeah. That was fun, going to Luckenbach.
So there was a moment in the film, may have gone by quickly, where you see this photograph, and I wanted to explain that this is a photograph of a crow's nest built from barbed wire that's on display at the Windmill Museum in Lubbock, Texas.
Guy was obsessed with this crow's nest.
He had a photo of it as well, and he would show that photo and tell the story to everybody that came by his house.
And you were obsessed with crows at the same time that Guy was obsessed with crows.
We were. While we were shooting his on-camera interviews, that summer we had a family of crows living in our backyard raising 3 chicks. And so I was spending every day out there talking to them and watching them. And while we were shooting Guy at his house on camera, between takes, we were talking about the crows. There were some crows out in his backyard, and he told me about this photo and how cool it was, this nest. We also talked about the Heckle and Jekyll cartoon, and he had some old printed comic books of Heckle and Jekyll that he had found. He was working on a song at the time about the crows.
Yeah. Caw Caw Blues ended up being the song, yes. And, of course, Guy's obsession with crows is what led Terry Allen to sculpt the crow where Guy's cremains live now. And that sculpture is at the Whitfield collection at Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. And people will be able to go there and see it. Well, Paul, it's been fun talking to you about the film we made.
It's been a blast.
Can I go change into my pajamas now?
We only have formal attire here at Slow Uvalde Films.
I'm wearing my cute shoes.
They are very cute.
All right, well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.